If there's one thing I've realized about my 90-day contract to end my addictions, it's just how difficult it is to escape or let go of them and how attached I am to these addictions. So, I didn't smoke for the first 54 days of my 90-day contract, which is great progress, but I ended up smoking on most days after that. Uh, After 90 days of my contract, I ended up smoking on 28 of them, which ends up being about 31% of the 90 days. This to me is a failure. I was meant to go for 90, so I wrote a new contract where I'm now aiming for 100. I managed to reduce the amount of sugars I eat, but during my winter holidays I ate a lot. I also stopped going to the gym and just kept being more lazy and eating more sugars. It's crazy how I'm unable to resist when I do crave it. I think it's way more difficult to quit sugars than it is to quit smoking, probably because I've been more dependent on sugars for many, many more years, ever since I was a kid, basically. When my brain craves it, I autopilot and just head to the nearest shop and buy chocolate. It's crazy to see how I don't think straight in those moments. It's like my brain thinks, oh, I could buy some chocolate, and there's no voice of reason to say, hey, you shouldn't buy chocolate. Well, that voice of reason is there, and it does say you shouldn't buy chocolate. It's just like my body just walks towards the shop and buys the chocolate. I'm not even aware of it happening. I've managed to reduce the amount of YouTube I watch um, by a decent amount, but I still have days where I'll wake up, first thing I do is watch YouTube. Day ends up getting short, just end up watching a lot of YouTube all day. I did manage to put a blocker on my browser, which has seriously reduced the amount that I watch. So there is evidence that putting a YouTube blocker does help. The only problem is I still find myself wanting to watch a YouTube video during my lunch break. I still find myself wanting to watch it in the evenings when I don't have much else to do and I'm just relaxing a bit before I go to bed. I have been watching YouTube ever since I was 12, 13 years old, pretty much every day. So again, just like the sugars, it's one of those behaviors that's just built into me, and it's kind of, well, not kind of, it's just one of, I'd say it's my biggest addiction, like the hardest one to quit. I'm short on ideas on how to tackle this issue, so if you've got any suggestions for how I can improve, please leave a comment. I really need suggestions for how to tackle these addictions. Again, I'm surprised at how much I failed this 90-day contract. Lastly, I just need to mention that I have managed to reduce porn to the least that I've ever seen since I've hit puberty when I was 15. Um, I've managed to acknowledge more of how much of a vice it's been for over 8 years in my life. And I have seen some improvements, and it's very important to recognize improvements, but it doesn't mean that I've gone 90 days without, which is the main goal. It's not just to reduce, it's to actually go without it. Um, yeah, just genuinely one of the most difficult things to avoid, in a similar vein to how my brain autopilots to buy chocolate when I crave it. My brain just autopilots to open an incognito tab when I crave it. It's very difficult to just find the voice of reason in those moments. I found some commonalities between the addictions that I'm having and the seven deadly sins, as used in religion. Uh, Sloth or laziness when I smoke weed or when I watch YouTube. There's gluttony when I eat sugars, and there's lust when I watch porn. It's interesting to find a contrast between the different sins and their opposing virtues. So, by practicing diligence and keeping a persistent work ethic, I can combat sloth, I can combat watching too much YouTube or smoking weed. By practicing modesty, temperance, and kindness to myself and to others, I can also regulate my emotions a bit more and combat my gluttony problem, my sugar addiction. By practicing chastity, celibacy, which is something I'm trying to get more into as well, and mindfulness, it can help me combat lust. Um, I I understand that there's a weird connotation with the word celibacy as well. These days it's mostly associated with the term incel, like involuntary celibate. Women are the problem, they don't want me. That this is not what the problem is for me. I just recognize that the problem's within myself at the moment, how my brain just gets hooked to one mode of thinking, can't really escape from it. The number one way to combat that is by not pursuing those lustful thoughts. and by practicing celibacy. Now, I understand that to really truly pursue that intention, you've got to think of it as a lifelong thing. I still very much like the idea of getting a girlfriend. I still want to, have a partner, so I don't think I'm going to become completely celibate, but I think there are definitely it's definitely a virtue. I think it's definitely a virtue to stop getting my brain so hooked to a certain mode of thinking. So that's what I mean by that. So yeah, I've restarted the 90-day contract after the last one finished. The only problem is that less than 10 days in and I've already eaten too much sugar. I've already seen porn once. I've also watched a lot of YouTube. I haven't smoked, but that's the easiest of all these addictions. The only one that's actually a drug, or classified as a drug, is the easiest one for me to combat, which is interesting. Yeah. By seeing that contrast between sins and virtues, at least having something to focus on as on the opposite end of the behaviors that I'm trying to avoid, instead of just looking back and seeing what behaviors I'm trying to avoid, I can look forward and see what virtues to practice. I think that's going to help a bit over these next 90 days, but I do need suggestions to help combat these addictions. So anything that has helped anyone combat any of these addictions, if you've got any recommendations, please let me know. Been looking into doing the 12-step program to help combat these. I think it's really good to sort of understand and frame the issue, actually, think about it, sit there and actually try to digest some of the undigested emotions that all of these have brought in my past. Yeah. So yeah, any suggestions, very welcome. Thanks for watching.